Let's get started. Oops. So welcome to today's REDCap workshop. Big thank you to Steve and Amy from Brown Advanced CTR for getting this and all the other REDCap offerings scheduled. We should have events scheduled throughout the end of the year within a couple weeks, so keep checking their website. My name is Jeff Richardson. I'm the data coordinator in the Lifespan Biostatistic Epidemiology Research Design and Informatics Core. I'm also a REDCap administrator for Lifespan. There are going to be handouts for today's presentation, which will be emailed to you afterwards, so don't worry about trying to take extensive notes. And a brief satisfaction survey is going to be included in the email as well. And I invite you to please click the link and share your honest feedback. All right, our learning objectives today, we're going to go over some basic arithmetic in REDCap, examples including numbers, adding variables together, subtracting, calculating the mean. We'll look at some other numeric functions like exponents, square roots, logarithms, rounding. We'll go over calculations with dates, including the date diff function. We'll talk about date formats and the calc date action tag. We'll look at calculations for text, the calc text action tag, and go over some if then else logic, and wind down with some other tips and frequently asked questions. And we'll leave time at the end for Q&A. So that's our agenda today, but the real goal is to share the exhilaration one feels after getting your calculations to work perfectly and have your project do everything that you want it to. So until the release of REDCap version 10.4.0 in October of 2020, calculations in REDCap could only result in a number. You couldn't have a calculation show you a date or text. But since then, with the addition of the calc date and calc text action tags, calculations in REDCap can now result in numbers, dates, or text. But again, this is only for versions 10.4.0 and higher. Calc date and calc text became available for Lifespan REDCap users in November of 2021 when we upgraded to version 11.1.18. CNE, you guys should have this by the end of July, I'm told. So calculations can now result in numbers, dates, or text. You want to use a calculated field if you want your result as a number. If your calculation should result in a date, you use a text box field that is validated as a date or date time and using the calc date action tag. This will calculate a date, a specific amount of time away from a date you give it. For example, if you want to know the discharge date, if you know the discharge date and want to schedule a follow-up 10 days later, you can use calc date to tell you what day the follow-up should be. Calc date always returns a date. If your calculation should result in text, again, use a text box field, and this time use the calc text action tag. And we'll go over all this later. So calculated fields can only return numerical values. You should use a calculated field anytime you want REDCap to give you back a number, such as calculating a BMI or the number of days between two dates. Calculated fields always return numbers. It's strongly recommended that you don't use the today inside quotes or now inside quotes within calculated fields, which we'll talk about later on. And it's recommended that calculated field types are not excessively utilized in REDCap data collection instruments. Use them only when it's necessary to know the calculated value while on that page or the following pages, or when, admit a couple people here, sorry. Or when the result of the calculation affects the data entry workflow. If there's no reason for the data entry person to know what the BMI is when you have a height and weight, then it's just as easy to do the calculation outside of REDCap. All right, we'll start with some basic arithmetic, beginning with addition. There are two methods of adding variables in REDCap. You can use the sum function, which calculates the sum as each value is entered, or you can use plus signs, which calculates the sum only after all the values are entered. So see what that looks like. You can see that the sum function is going to calculate the sum as each value is entered, and using the plus signs only returns the sum after all the values are entered. And if one of them gets deleted, the plus signs will also get deleted. So for subtraction, there is no subtraction equivalent to the sum function. So a workaround is just multiply the variables by -1. And here's what that looks like. So 6 plus -8 plus -10. And it's the same behavior as in the previous slide. Now we'll talk about adding non-numeric variables. So REDCap uses the value assigned to each answer choice as the answer's value or score. So if you're adding two true and false fields together, when both answers are true, the sum will be equal to 2. If only one answer is true, the sum will equal 1. And if both answers are false, the answer is going to be 0. So here's an example, adding two multiple choice fields together. Notice the NA value is coded with a 0 to avoid interfering with calculations involving the other choices. So what REDCap is doing is adding together the value assigned to each answer choice. So this is for radio buttons. Here we have a checkbox field asking how many days we exercised last week. Checkbox fields are unique in that each answer for the question is considered a variable. So this is really like 7 yes or no questions. Did you exercise on Monday? Yes or no? Did you exercise on Tuesday? Yes or no? So each option has a value of 1 when checked and 0 when unchecked. When you're adding checkbox fields, you want to use the same checkbox syntax as you use when you're using branching logic. So here's one way you could add up the results of this. But there's a couple other ways that are just equally as valid. And we'll see on the next slide how these are all going to produce the same answer. So here is that in action. Pretty straightforward. Okay, calculating the average or mean is super easy in REDCap. And here's how you set up the equation, a nice little mean function. And here's an example, calculating the average of 4 numbers. This works nicely. Okay. So let's say there's some reason why you don't want to use that mean function to calculate the average. We can still calculate it the old-fashioned way, adding the numbers together and dividing by the count of variables. So if you were to take on this challenge, don't hard code the denominator, because this is only going to give you the correct answer when all 4 variables are have a value. So you can see the average is not, it's wrong until all 4 numbers get entered. Instead, calculate the numerator and denominator separately, and then divide to calculate the average, which is going to show you the right answer regardless of how many questions have been answered. Here's a list of some other numeric functions in REDCap. We've already seen the sum and mean functions, and next we'll look at a few examples of some of these others. Here's an example demonstrating the use of functions for exponents, square roots, and logarithms. For exponents, displayed in the top right corner up there, you want to wrap the number in parentheses, followed by that caret, the shift 6, and then followed by the exponent wrapped in parentheses. The square root function is pretty straightforward, and for logarithms, you must specify the base, which defaults to base E, whatever that means. Okay, rounding in REDCap is also very straightforward. There's 3 rounding functions, and here you can see how they work. This is going to be in the handout, so you don't have to study it too deeply here. But just suppose you have a long, complicated equation that results in a value with many decimal places. You can simply wrap the equation in the round function. So add round open parentheses to the beginning, and then just add comma space digits to the end. Okay, now we'll look at a practical example calculation of BMI given a height and weight. So here's the equation when units are collected in kilograms and centimeters, and here's what it looks like in pounds and inches. And next we'll see it in action. Again, it's pretty straightforward. You just need to determine the units in which you collect the data. Pretty straightforward. All right, moving on to the date diff function. And now we're going to get into the calculations with dates. So date diff can calculate the duration between two dates or times. Here's the date diff syntax. Date 1 and date 2 are fields in your project. And here are the available units to use in your calculation. Make sure the units have the quotation marks around them. And so the only thing left to understand about the date diff function is the return signed value parameter. And this determines whether your result returns the true or absolute value of the date difference. Return signed value defaults to false. So by default, date diff will always return a positive number. If returned signed value is set to true, then if date 2 is later than date 1, the result is going to be positive. If date 1 is later than date 2, the result will be negative. So let's see what that looks like. So here's a quick example to demonstrate the date diff function. There's a reminder of the syntax, and this is from the last slide, and now we can sort of see that in action. So we select a value for date 1, and date 2 is prior to that. So the value on the right is negative. The calculation on the left will always be positive because it's using the default or false value of return signed value. If date 2 is set to later than date 1, the result will be positive. If date 2 is earlier than date 1, it's going to be negative. All right, so here's an example of another practical calculation where you want to determine age from someone's date of birth. Again, it's very straightforward using the date diff function. You can see there's nearly identical results, whether calculating the age in years or calculated the age in months divided by 12. And I suppose you could also calculate it with days divided by 365, but I don't know. I don't know why you want to do that. So moving on, we have a gestational age calculator, and this is going to be super helpful for a tiny percentage of people. But given the estimated and actual delivery dates, we can calculate a baby's gestational age. So days and weeks are calculated separately. And hat tip Robin Cram, who brought this to my attention. But so I'm not sure what these calculations are doing, but they work, which is most important, and I'm happy to share them with you all. Okay, now let's talk about date formats in REDCap. So by format, I mean the year, month, and day type of format. So it matters. First of all, keep all the date fields in your project in the same format, please. One reason is that when eyeballing the data, you will immediately see that 12/5/2020 in the month, day, year format is later than 12/6/2020 in the DMY format. Additionally, you're often going to get an incorrect answer if the date fields in an equation are in different formats. So if a date calculation is not working correctly and it's using the MDY or DMY format, Troubleshooting steps will often include checking to see if the calculation does work in YMD format, and it often does. If a date calculation is not working correctly using YMD format, you know that the error must be with syntax or something other than the date format itself. YMD formatted dates also conveniently happen to sort chronologically when those dates get stored as a character or text values, and this can be useful at times. Additionally, there are some cases when a function will only work if you're using if the variables are set up the YMD format. So unless you have a terrific reason not to use it, I would suggest using YMD. But let's say you have a field that like you do have a terrific reason. Your people are insisting they like month to year or date month to year. You can actually use a calc date field to force it into YMD format and then use that in the calculation. But we're not going to get into that today. Okay, so REDCap can calculate the difference between date time fields and just regular date fields. It's going to assume midnight for the time component of the date field. And here's a quick example. So that's helpful to know. Now we'll move on to calc date, which adds or subtracts a specified amount of time from a date or date time field and provides the result of the calculation as a date or date time. The first parameter inside the calc date function should be a text box field with date or date time validation. The second parameter represents the offset number amount that should be added or subtracted. It can be a decimal number or an integer. And to subtract or go backwards in time, you want to use a negative number. The third parameter represents the units of the offset amount, which will be represented by these options. Again, the unit option must be wrapped in quotes or possibly in quotes. Both the source field and the result field must be a text field with date or date time validation. So here's a few examples demonstrating calc date in action. And again, that's also pretty straightforward with calc date. Now we'll quickly discuss how to extract a year, month, or date value from a date field. So the old method shown here was complex and unintuitive. I'm not sure why it worked, but it did. Now there's new special functions available as of November 2023, available in REDCap versions 13.11.0 and higher. And here's what the new method to extract the year looks like. Much easier. So to set this up, you want to use the date functions inside a calculated field type. And see what that looks like. So choose a date, 4th of July, and it's going to extract each component there. Here's a simple calculation to extract the day of the week from a date. So I'm joking. I know that's not simple. And to be honest, I don't know exactly how it works, but I'm okay not knowing. I'm satisfied enough that it works, and until it breaks and stops working, I don't feel like I need to dig too deep into this. It just works, and we'll look at that on the next page. So here it is in action. June 1st was a Saturday. June 2nd, a Sunday. June 3rd, a Monday. And June 10th, a Monday. All right. So moving on to calc text, which outputs the result as text, but also dates and also numbers too, as you'll shortly see. Before getting into calc text, however, let's talk briefly about if-then-else statements and how they can be used with calc text and throughout REDCap. So the syntax is if, open parentheses, specify a condition, comma space value if true, comma space, value if false, and then close parentheses. So here's an example. If the value of the field weight is greater than 100, then it's going to give a value of 44. But if weight is less than or equal to 100, it will give 11 as a result. One issue with this calculation as is if the weight field is blank, if it hasn't been entered yet, this example is still going to give 11 as a result. So additional logic shown here is necessary to withhold a result until the weight variable is not blank. This is saying if the weight is blank, return a blank value. Otherwise, continue to evaluate the rest of the statement. Let's look at an example. So on the top left equation, only the top left equation has the additional logic built in. You can see that even though there's no value entered yet for age, the other three equations already display an answer. All right, so let's play and see this in action. Here's some more examples. You can categorize choices from a multiple choice field, or you could assign the correct email address to be chosen from a list of individuals. Here's another calc text example. We have a certification date, an expiration date, and a field that uses the @today action tag to identify the current date. We use calc text and date diff here to determine whether someone's certification has expired or not. Here's what that looks like. So if we certified in June of 2023, a year later it expires in June of 2024. When that value gets to 0, it's going to that status shows us that it's expired. Notice how today inside quotes can be used inside of date diff and is functionally equivalent to a field that captures today's date with the @today action tag. So this is going to be relevant on the next slide. So here's a different sort of alternative approach that one might take to calculate status. In the prior slide, we first created a days until expired variable and then used that outcome in our calculation to determine status. In this example, status is calculated in a single equation. It's important to note that today, inside quotes there, cannot be used inside the calc text functions. This was surprising to me. The calculation on the right demonstrates how today in quotes can give the incorrect result. The only difference between the equation on the right and the equation on the left is that today in quote is today in quotes versus the date underscore today variable. Okay. We're almost finished now, so we're going to start wrapping things up. We'll look at how to replace a missing date field. So if your date field is missing, you can for someone you can replace it with another date. So let's take a look like what that looks like. So if date if date 1 is blank, use date 2. Otherwise, use date 1. So here on the calculation at the bottom with calc text, you can say it's doing what we want. But interestingly, to set this up, you have to use calc text and not calc date. It doesn't work with calc date. The calc date syntax, it wants you to put a date and then the comma space and the offset number and then comma space and then the units. So it can't handle this if else logic. So calc text is the answer. So we'll look at the rest of that. So if If date 1 is blank, use date 2. Otherwise, use date 1, and that's what our function here is doing, our calc date function. Okay. We'll go over some frequently asked questions. One is, why does my field have a vertical red line at the end? So let me just show you what it's talking about. So do you see on those calculations, the vertical red line there? When it clicks save and stay, those vertical red lines disappear. So the vertical red line on the right side of your calculated field indicates that the value displaying in the browser does not match what has been saved in the database. So if it's your first time opening the form, calculated fields and fields with automatically filled data will display the line until you save them and should disappear if you click save and stay. If you have saved the form previously, it indicates that something feeding the value has changed and you're going to need to resave the form in order to update the value in the database. If I need to modify a calculated field, how can I update all the records that were previously entered? The answer is data quality rule H. So if any calculated fields have ended up with incorrect values, whether due to field changes in the project or due to previous data imports, or maybe the calculation was set up incorrectly, users can now run rule H, not only to find any incorrect calculated values, but it will additionally display a button that when clicked will autofix all of them at once. If I import data, will new and modified data rerun and update the calculated fields? Yes, when performing data import, REDCap is going to perform the calculations for any calculated fields that are triggered by the values being imported. For example, if you have a BMI field whose calculation is based off height and weight, then if you perform a data import of height and weight, it will automatically recalculate the BMI for each record that is imported, and also save those calculations and log them in the logging page. So here's a question about sending automated survey invitations. I want to set up an ASI to send out monthly surveys on the 25th of each month. If someone new enrolls, how can I prevent them from being sent all the old surveys from prior months? So here you want to add some date diff logic to the step 2. And here you can see where, let's take May, for example. If the value for today is greater than May 25th, the answer will not be greater than, it's going to be a negative number, which is not greater than or equal to 0. So that's going to evaluate as false, so it won't send. All right, now just we'll wind down with some random tips. Don't forget to include the event names or instant numbers in your equation. So in all the examples I've shown today have been in a project that is not longitudinal. In longitudinal projects, for every calculation, don't forget to prepend the event name. So the event name shown there. If you have a repeating instrument, every example today was not in a repeating instrument. So if you are using a repeating instrument and you're using a calculation, make sure to include the instance of the repeating instance and append it to the variable name. And in longitudinal projects with repeating instruments, you want to add both. Another tip is to use a value of 0 for calculations involving an option for NA. We saw an example earlier with our depression question. This won't interfere with calculations or equations involving the other answer choices, but this doesn't always work when there's already a meaningful value for 0 in use, such as in true or false or yes/no fields. In these cases, the calculation might have to be done outside of REDCap because it's more important to keep the values consistent. You wouldn't want the value of 0 to represent no in one yes or no field, and then have another value for no, like 2, when the yes or no question requires an option for prefer not to answer. Another tip is to space your equations neatly. Use the space provided. Use full screen mode if it helps. But don't try to cram everything into the same row. The same calculation, exact same calculation there, works just as well when it's spread out neatly, like this other example, and it's just much easier to read. You can also add comments inside of equations now. So if you wanted to comment out a row to explain what some equation is doing, you can do that. It's always good practice. Some more tips. Don't feel obligated to keep your entire calculation inside of just a single field. Many times it's much simpler and much easier to troubleshoot when the equations are broken down into smaller equations, into their smaller components. You want to use calculated fields, again, reminder, only when it's necessary to know the calculated value while you're on that page or on the following pages, or when the result of the calculation affects the data entry workflow. Otherwise, consider doing the calculations outside of REDCap. Especially if you have a really big project, the calculations, if there's thousands of records, it might start behaving slow, like pages are slow to load. The unnecessary calculations will only slow your project down. Avoid using today or now in calculated fields. This is because every time you access and save the form, the calculation will run and update the field value. So if you calculate the age as of today, and then a year later you access the form to review or make updates, the elapsed time as of today will also be updated by 1 year. Another reminder that calculated fields don't normally calculate except when you import data or when you open the form they're on and then save it. So to update all the calculated fields in your existing records, you can either open each record, open the form in question and then save it, or you can run data quality rule H to detect them and run the calculations in bulk. So if you have any questions, you can send them to REDCap support at lifespan.org, where myself and my colleagues monitor throughout the day, and we can help you with your questions. If you have a more in-depth question and you'd like to meet with me individually, I'm happy to do so. And you can schedule a meeting through our Lifespan Birdie website, which for the time being is can be found at this link. And once you get there, you click on schedule appointment and then choose a data management consultation with me at a time that's convenient. Okay. That concludes today's presentation. I'll open it up to questions, but thanks everyone who's made it this far. Alexis, I'm happy to meet with you afterwards. Will you be sending these slides to participants? Yes. Everyone who attended today, we should have your email address. You're going to be sent the handouts from today and a satisfaction survey, either this afternoon or sometime this week. Anyone else have any questions? You can feel free to unmute yourself or Adam or enter the chat. Thank you, Elise. Thanks everyone for coming. All right, if no questions, we can probably end the meeting today. So thank you everyone for coming, and be on the lookout for that. Thanks everyone. Be on the lookout for that email with the handouts. Right.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. Giving me a minute to shut this down. New at driving this.
Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Alexis.
So I've been following the manual, and Usually it works, but I'm not sure what's going on with the date differential this time, and I was wondering if you would be able to take a look at it, if I could share my screen.
Yeah, can you try to share your screen? I wonder if I need to give you ability to do so.
It looks like I can.
Oh, cool.
So I did the equation,
Yeah,
and I put in the variable name. However, it's still telling me that there's an error when I go to save it, but I'm
yeah.
not.
You know what it is? It's that comma before they close parentheses.
Oh, no. Is it? Okay. That was my bad. I'm glad that's an easy fix. I was
Yeah.
wondering how to get rid of it.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you.
All right, no problem. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.